here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian war veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98. He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service. Thank you.
What you just saw there was MPs, senators, and guests of President Zelensky and the government of Canada at the official address by President Zelensky when he was in Ottawa a couple weeks back, applauding a man who fought in World War II against the Russians. Well, the Russians and the Soviet Union fought with Canada against the Nazis in World War II, which means that MPs, senators, and guests accidentally applauded a man who fought for the Nazis. This accidental applause caused immediate backlash from across the Canadian community, but most specifically with the Canadian Jewish community. This resulted in many apologies, including from the speaker, who unknowingly invited this guest. This also resulted in his resignation a couple weeks back. Hello, and welcome to Political Debrief, the show where we talk about the issues in Canadian politics and how they affect Canadian youth. I'm Josh Oliverio, and today we're talking about the Nazi controversy in the House of Commons. To talk about that, I'm excited to be joined by the former Speaker of the House of Commons, Geoff Regan. We talked about this, how we can prevent this incident from happening again, and as well we also talked a little bit about how we can make question period a little bit more watchable. And if you take a look at the podcast edition of Political Debrief, which contains our full interview, you can learn a little bit more about Geoff Regan's past, his parliamentary history, and also how he got into politics. Hope you enjoy that conversation now. All right, and joining me now is the former Member of Parliament for Halifax West, the former Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, and most notably, the former Speaker of the House of Commons from 2015 to 2019, Geoff Regan. Mr. Regan, thanks so much for taking the time for Political Debrief.
My pleasure, Joshua.
A big element, too, of when Canadians get a look inside the House, aside from question period, is when visiting heads of states or important people give addresses to Parliament. And most recently, we had a little bit of a controversy with the Ukrainian president's address. And there was an individual who, now former Speaker Rhoda, acknowledged in the gallery, who turned out fought for the Nazis in World War II, or fought for a unit that was affiliated with the Nazis in World War II. I guess I'm curious to know, and I think that a lot of Canadians are curious because they've seen some mixed messaging. How much scrutiny and involvement is there over these visits? Like how could this have been missed?
Well, I can think of, during my time as Speaker, 3 occasions when we had a special guest make a speech to a joint session of Parliament. Those were the visits of President Obama in the U.S., Malala Yousafzai, and also the President of the Netherlands, whose name I'm afraid I don't recall offhand. But in each of those cases, my office would have had a list of people that would be in the Speaker's gallery. That would have been shared with the Parliamentary Protective Service. And their job, and they may have shared it with the RCMP, I don't know about that, but in each case, they would be looking to see, do we have people here who have criminal records? Do we have people here who have outstanding warrants against them? Do we have some reason to believe that so-and-so is a security risk, right? But what they wouldn't be looking for is this person a political risk? Is there something this person was somehow once attached to, right, that could make this a political issue? And in this case, an international relations issue. Well, they don't do that. That's really the responsibility of the Speaker and his staff. And I don't know who was involved in the actual process, whether Mr. Rhoda shared the idea with his staff or not. He hasn't talked about that, and I feel very badly for him. But this was a very serious error, and I think he took the appropriate action by stepping down. And now we have Anthony's an old friend of mine, so I feel bad for him. But the new Speaker, Greg Fergus, is also a very good friend of mine, and I have great faith in him and confidence, and wish him the very best. And I think he'll do a superb job. In fact, I told him my only concern is probably make me look bad by doing way better than I did.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. Just hold your thoughts on that. When I'll just say President Obama. When President Obama was here, you would have been allotted a certain number of seats in the gallery, I'm assuming.
Well, it's not. It's actually it's more like, so keep in mind that the speaker in the House of Commons, the speaker is the boss. Okay, so so that the speaker has a gallery, right, with a certain number of spots, and and that a certain other number of spots, a certain number of other spots, pardon me, is allocated for other parties to have people to have their guests in there, and a certain number for the public generally. So just don't want you to get the idea that, for instance, the government can allocate some of those spots to the speaker. The government doesn't tell the speaker what to do. That's very important to understand, right? In the House of Commons is more like the reverse.
So, for example, the speaker Speaker Rota wouldn't have sent his guest list to the government, and the government would have said, "Yep, they're vetted, they're good to go." Whatever. That wouldn't be the government, would it?
Well, as I was saying, right, so the list would have gone to the Parliamentary Protective Service, right, which primarily reports to the two speakers of the House and the Senate. It also reports to the head of to the Minister of Public Safety. But I can't imagine, right, that they or the RCMP would be looking for anything. That their job is to look for security risks, as I described, right? They're there looking to see, is someone here who's dangerous? And when someone comes in, they have to go through a security screening, even if they are on the approved list. Okay, so if they have any metal on them, that's going to be discovered. And so they're there to make sure there's no security risk. But the political risk is another issue, and that part of it we wouldn't have asked the Prime Minister's office or anybody else for advice in relation to political risks. That's something we have to figure out and take responsibility for.
Do you think that there should be more, I guess, oversight of these types of things? Like, do you think that the speaker should have to submit not for just normal House proceedings, but for an event where the House isn't sitting, like a state, like a special address to Parliament? Do you think the speaker should have to submit a list to another entity for any sort of political vetting? Because really, this isn't, I guess, with special addresses, it's more the government is kind of running and coordinating everything for the whole visit. Do you think that the government should have more oversight when it comes to that kind of thing?
Well, I don't think the government should be telling the Speaker of the House of Commons what to do. That's a very important thing. Now, having said that, the House can always tell the Speaker, pardon me, what to do. The House is the body that can direct the Speaker and give instructions or give ideas. Members of Parliament can give ideas to the Speaker about how to avoid this situation in the future. And frankly, you can be sure that everybody who ran as a candidate to be Speaker, as they made calls to other MPs seeking their support, would have received lots of suggestions about how to avoid this in future. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's a debate about this topic in the House. If, for example, some party brings forward a motion or makes some proposal of a structure that relates to this, we'll have to wait and see what the House decides in that regard. But there are a range of options. The key thing is that the Speaker and the Speaker's staff have to exercise good judgment, be careful, and think about who they're inviting, obviously.
You mentioned it already, so let's jump to that now. We have a new Speaker of the House of Commons now, as of this Tuesday, Greg Fergus, Quebec MP, first Black Speaker of the House of Commons. Is that just kind of a symbolic thing, or does it have a real impact on the diversity of the House?
So I think that, first of all, as I said, Greg's a dear friend of mine, and I'm a fan of his and have been for years. And he's a very good, solid MP. I think he'll do a great job. So that's it doesn't matter what his color is in that sense whatsoever, right? He's a super guy. But it says to people maybe who aren't, up till now, we've never had a speaker, right, who wasn't white. And so this says to people who aren't white, you're part of this country. And it says, you can do this too, right? I like that. I think that's a great thing. That it's, to a young person, like for instance, in my province, we have the largest Indigenous Black population in Canada, right here in Nova Scotia. And for a young Black Nova Scotian, it says you could be the Speaker of the House of Commons, right? There's no reason why it couldn't be the Prime Minister for that matter. And that, I think, is an important message that I really feel very good about.
I'm sure you still watch Question Period from time to time. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Like, what does is there something that Speaker Fergus needs to do differently, or is there anything that can be improved in question period? Like, what, I guess my question is, what can be improved in question period to make it more civil and substantive? Or can it?
Well, I know he's talked about that and he has some ideas for that, I think. And I may be speaking with him at certain times, I expect. And if he asks for my advice on that, I'll certainly offer it. I can tell you a bit of what my experience was. One of the things that I often did was if someone repeatedly was heckling, then I would point out, I would say, so and so, is interrupting and shouldn't be interrupting. And of course, you can't just say their name, right? And you have to, as a speaker, you refer to someone by their constituency. Well, there are 337 other MPs in the House of Commons, and after the next election, there'll be more. And you've got to know all those names. For instance, one of them would be Abitibi Bay James Nunavik EU. Another one, just this is one name, right? Another one is Charles Wood St. James Assiniboia Headingley. Now, those are two of the longer names, but it gives you an idea that when you have to remember that and know the person standing up, right? Or the person who's not even standing up but speaking in the background, because the person who's standing up is the person you just called upon to speak. So you already have their writing name in your mind. But the person back behind them somewhere or over on the other side, when you see their face, you have to know the name of their constituency if they're making noise and you want to call them out. So I worked hard to learn those and kept practicing, with a little book I had, all the names and faces. Actually, we had an app on my iPad called the Flashcard app, which was fantastic for learning those and practicing them. And but however, that had some impact. That sometimes it would quiet things down a little bit, sometimes. But I got the sense that for a lot of those MPs, they must not have gotten a lot of feedback from their constituents when I would call them out, partly because people don't often watch question period. And even the media, and this disappointed me, that the press gallery members have the press gallery, a gallery where they can sit, certain allotted seats, right? And most days there weren't many in those seats. And that's frustrating because you'd like them to know who's making all the noise so that when they're commenting about, on the rare occasion when they're actually discussing the question of decorum in the House of Commons, they can say, well, here are the groups that are making the most noise, or here's who isn't making a lot of noise. From my perspective, that would be a big help to the speaker, but they're not there to help the speaker. And you have to keep that in mind. They have a job to do reporting what they feel is critical and important. And they don't often feel that's decorum.
I guess, do you try, when you were speaker, did you try to not have to kick people out of the house? Like, was that something that you really dreaded, or was that something that you were prepared to do? Just like,
I guess I wouldn't have used the word dreaded, but it's not a bad word because I'd seen it happen before. And I knew that often when a speaker would throw somebody out, and of course, I mentioned that you have to use their constituency names, right? Well, the one time you use the person's name is when you are throwing them out, right? It's called naming them. And that's when you're calling upon them to leave. And if they don't leave, the sergeant at arms, you ask them to come and escort them out. That I thought I would never do it because I saw that when it had happened before, members took advantage of the opportunity, the fact that they'd get some media coverage for being tossed out and make a fuss to the media saying this is all about the issue I was raising in this terrible thing that so-and-so is doing, and here's why I got so upset, and they'd have a field day. And sometimes these days they make money. They can raise money for their party, lots of money for their party by doing that. So, and the other thing that's important to understand is that when the understanding Order 11, the power the speaker has is to eject the person for the rest of the sitting day. So not for the next week, not for the next month. You can't dock their pay. You can't fine them. All you can do is say you're out for the rest of the day. That isn't all that bad, right? The other thing the speaker can do, though, sometimes, and you do this very reticently also, is to say, we're not going to hear from this person for a while. So, and the tradition generally has been that if someone, for example, uses unparliamentary language or calls someone else a liar, for example, which is unparliamentary, and they won't retract that, then you say, okay, we're not going to hear from this person for a while. Or sometimes you might decide to eject them. But not letting them speak for a while can be a very effective mechanism. Also, you have to use that very warily. And again, you want to remain impartial as the speaker. You want to not get too involved each day, and respect the fact that each party has to do their job in an adversarial system where they're all competing to be the next government. And you got to that's an important process. And it's important that the opposition be able to organize their attack on the government, and vice versa, in a sense, right? So keeping these things in perspective, having a knowledge, a sense of the House and its atmosphere, and knowing when to step in and when not to. It's a very challenging thing, and I was often frustrated with the decorum or lack thereof in the House. I can tell you that one piece of advice I got was very valuable to me, and I think it's worth talking about for a moment. And that was early in my term as Speaker, after a really frustrating question period when there was a lot of noise and I was getting annoyed at it all. My director of communications, who had worked for the previous three speakers, so she'd been around the Hill for a while and had a lot of experience. She told me the story from the late 90s of when Speaker Gibb, or Gilbert Parent, everyone called him Gibby, when he was the host of the Commonwealth Speakers Conference. He asked the speaker from India, "How do you control more than 500 members?" And the speaker from India answered, "I don't. I control myself." That was very good advice, because sometimes it helps. I mean, it doesn't help at all if you get upset, right? If you're as the speaker. If you stay calm, I think it lowers the temperature a bit. And you're not gonna freeze the place, so to speak. You're not gonna bring it down to 0 degrees Celsius. But if you can lower it a little, that's worth a lot. And sometimes that requires just standing up, taking a few seconds, letting the noise abate, which it usually does eventually, and then carry on. But it can be very frustrating, very trying, and you can't get upset.
All right, Geoff Regan, thanks so much for making time for me today.
My pleasure, Joshua. Take care.
And that's it for this episode of Political Debrief. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to check out the full unedited interview with Geoff Regan, you can check that out now. There's a link down below and it's also on your screen. I invite you to check that out. It was actually a really interesting conversation. Did you know that Geoff Regan's dad was also very involved in politics? You can learn more about that story by checking out the audio-only episode. That's all from me for now, but I would invite you and ask you to subscribe on YouTube so that way you can get notified whenever we post a new episode, and please consider following me on all social media. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode.